Hello all, we just reached 200, so I'll run back through here really quick on the functionality and what we have going on. So I would ask if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat function for any technical questions concerning the platform. To get to the chat function, you'll just move your mouse and the chat dialog bubble will appear. You have 7 little bubbles that usually appear at the bottom of the screen, and the one that's marked that looks like a cartoon bubble, that is your chat dialog functionality, and go ahead and open that up, and you can send to the host and presenters a message explaining what your technical issue is, and we'll try to get that resolved. We are currently recording, and we will be recording this session so that we can play this back later, or folks can play it back later. So we'll try to maintain our professionalism as best I can. I know that's difficult for some of you all to believe, but I'll do my best. And then we would also ask that you'll notice that we have question and answers or Q&A open as well. That functionality, we'll be using that for the Q&A portions of the program. So you'll be able to ask your questions. Everybody is currently muted, so all attendees or participants coming in are muted. Your line will stay muted throughout so that we don't end up with 400 dogs barking all at one time. As many of us have become very aware in the virtual world that we live in now, with all the virtual meetings we have, sometimes it's really nice to have everybody muted. And when you start putting 300 and 400 people onto a phone line, it's nice to have mute. The polling is currently open, so I would ask that you go ahead and take the poll. Would you rather be in Zoom, Orlando, St. Louis, everybody's favorite choice, or Rome? And then would you participate in webinars supported by the additional webinars supported by EDQW? Just answer that one yes, no, and then hit submit. We would love to get your feedback on where we should be at. It looks like he just closed the poll. Hey.
It was set on a timer at the time.
Oh, so the timer went off on the poll. So if you didn't get a chance to take the poll, I apologize. But it looks like there's a few people that are Zoom aficionados and wish we were in Zoom. Sorry, we're DOD, can't use Zoom. Orlando, I'm glad to see Orlando. There's a few, we have 63 of us want to be in Rome, 12 in St. Louis. That was my pick, was St. Louis. 87 no answers. We're going to have to build that rate up. We can't have 87 no answers next poll, because we need you to be answering. If you're out there, we want you hitting that dialogue. We'll get you to where you're working out on the poll. That's part of the way that we can make this an interactive, somewhat fun experience, moving through and keep people engaged. So we'll have polls going on throughout, and I'll hand over to Jordan.
Thank you, Brian. And so I'd like to welcome everybody to the 16th DoD Environmental Monitoring and Data Quality Workshop, webinar, right? So, you know, we would all have preferred to be meeting in person. There's a lot of that interaction that we're going to miss. But we are excited about having this opportunity to utilize this tool to reach out and convey some things that we thought were important for the community to have access to. And as Brian indicated, and as the results of the poll show, well, this is something that this mechanism for outreach is something we'd like to look into doing again, but it's really up to you guys, the community. If it's useful to you, we'd be happy to provide more of this. And so when the webinar actually completely ends, there'll be a survey, and as part of that survey, there'll be an opportunity for you guys to indicate as to what topics you'd like us to present on, and based on that feedback, you know, we'll plan on offering more. For us, like I said, we're pretty excited about the level of feedback we've gotten in participation for this, and so we continue to kind of carry this forward. So Brian sort of went over this up front, but I thought I would take an opportunity just to talk through this really quickly, just some of the things associated with the webinar. So everybody on the line is going to be muted other than the panelists who are presenting. If you have any questions, please use the QA function in the chat, in the tool. The chat function, all that information actually gets sent to the panelists as well. and so we encourage you guys to use that. It should also be noted that this webinar is being recorded. So if there's if anyone else wants to watch it or the like, once we actually have it recorded and posted, we'll send all the participants, we'll get a link to where it's actually currently posted and put up, so that it can be viewed at a later date if you guys wish. So here's like I said, the agenda of the webinar. So I'm going to be giving a quick introduction as to, I, Jordan Edelson, serve as the chair of the DoD EDQW, and I'm just going to walk us through a little bit of introduction, but then we'll have Ms. Janice Willey talk a little bit about PFAS, sort of where we are with methods, talk a little bit about the new data validation guidelines. Then Brian Jordan will actually expand on data validation guidelines and talk more about where we are generally with some of those. And then Alyssa Wingard will actually walk us through an update for the DoD ELAP program. And at the end, we'd like to leave that time for the DoD open forum. It's probably one of the things I find most useful from us having our workshop every year. And so I want to give you guys an opportunity to provide questions. When I mentioned that QA function, to be utilizing that to carry you forward to sort of submit questions, each one of these presentations, excluding mine, has got time built in for you guys to actually ask questions. So we'd like, obviously, you guys to do that as the process moves forward. So as I mentioned, right, I'm the chair of the DoD Environmental Data Quality Work Group. So who are we and really what are we focused on? Well, this sort of lists the things that we're really focused on, but the main issue that we're addressing is ensuring that environmental data is appropriate for its intended use. And so everything we do, all the policy that we develop, all the collaboration and coordination we do, it's really, really focused on us being able to, like I said, ensure that data quality is appropriate for its intended use. The DoD ELAP program is designed that way, and that's really what we're focused on doing. That's really what our baseline mission statement is, making sure that data is appropriate for its use. And I use that term intentionally because I get the question on a regular basis, well, I want good data. Okay, how can I have good data? And the answer is, well, I need to know what your use is, right? That's how I can tell you if the data is appropriate for that purpose. So there's no real definition of that. So this sort of lays out how the EDQW functions, this diagram. So I, like I said, serve as the chair of EDQW, and I'm the Navy principal. Brian Jordan is the Army principal, and Dr. Seb Gillette is the Air Force principal. And we've got subgroups made up of folks from the DoD components that help provide technical support. And we actually report back up to Ms. Maureen Sullivan, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Environment. And we interface with some external organizations. I still sit on the board of TNI, and I also work closely with and serve as a prime representative on the Intergovernmental Data Quality Task Force. And I'll talk a little bit more about the IDQTF as we go forward. One of the things that doesn't show up on this diagram, though, is the fact that, over the past couple of years, we've had a wonderful relationship with our friends in the Department of Energy. In fact, we've really been able to make a lot of progress and headway with those guys. And I cannot tell you how excited and happy I am to have them as partners. I think it's a huge benefit from our standpoint because it saves resource, it makes our products better, and also from the standpoint of the users, right? There's consistency across the government with how we're handling issues about data quality. So I just want to make sure that I point that out, that it's been, like I said, a wonderful partnership with the DOE, and I'm really excited about that continuing into the future. So, Alyssa is going to be talking about, sort of anchoring the last presentation in the webinar, really talking through some details of the update for the DoD ELAP. But I always like to bring it up because I look at it as a significant success for us. I mean, we had a situation in which each service had their own program, was actually, using their own tools to do assessments. And we actually unionized everything on a standard, and then we went through and created the DoD ELAP so that we're now using third-party accrediting bodies. This has been going on since 2009, and like I said, it's been a significant success. It really has opened up the program. It's made it equal and fair for those labs and organizations that want to participate, and it's really allowed us to focus more of our resources on things like project-specific reviews. So as I mentioned when I talked about sort of how the EDQW functions, I talked a little bit about the IDQTF. So this is the Intergovernmental Data Quality Task Force. This organization, the IDQTF, is run out of the EPA's Federal Facilities Restoration and Reuse Office. So it's chaired by those guys at EPA, FIFRO, as well as the Office of Secretary of Defense. I serve as a principal representative. We also, on the executive committee, have both Brian Jordan and Seb Gillette as principals of the EDQW. And we've got these EPA folks from these offices listed as on the executive committee as well as a key representative from FIFRA, Doug Maddox. And the IDQTF has the same mission essentially as the EDQW, right? They're trying to ensure that data is appropriate for its intended use, really focused on quality products and getting things done. And there are lots of common ground between us and regulators in trying to reach those goals. And they're responsible namely for the UFP products that you guys have seen in UFP CLAP and the like, which you should be familiar with. And so, right now, the IDQTF is mostly focused on dealing with munitions, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we're still working, and I've said this in the past about, trying to function better with them on things like vapor intrusion and emerging contaminants. And these are things that we're working towards with IDQTF, and we hope in the future to have products where we can reach common ground on how investigations should be done and based on quality control considerations to sort of help us and the community in general. So as I mentioned, the IDQTF's really main focus of late has been munitions. And for the past couple of years, I've talked to this group about munitions, and I know it's outside of the wheelhouse for many of the folks on the line. But for us, the munitions is a collection of environmental data, and it serves a significant challenge. There really are some data quality issues that are associated with munitions investigations, and one of the key considerations for us and key issues that we're struggling with, and there's ways in which it's being trying to be addressed right now, is unlike with traditional chemical cleanup where we have defined risk endpoints, right? We know cancer risk values and we can design studies to be able to assess to that. We cannot do that with munitions as easily. There really is no sort of defined risk endpoint because most of the interactions with munitions is explosive, right? So what you're really worried about is acute risk and how that is acceptable and how that plays out. And so we struggle with that, putting this together. And so what we did was we created with the IDQTF this munitions response toolkit to sort of address quality control and how to get to those endpoints. And so this is an umbrella, the toolkit's an umbrella, where there's different modules and documents sitting under it. And the main modules that we've created and we're working on is Module 1, which deals with the RIFS phase of investigation. That module was completed last year and just updated last month. We produced an update. And Module 2, which we're working on now, which we hope to have out for comment at the end of the calendar year. And so Module 2 is dealing with the RA phase of investigation. And so both of these documents highly focus on, like I said, addressing these issues, munitions, through the use of the examples. And so actually in the documents themselves have colored text to sort of break out the important features and salient features of them. And so we've got green text, which actually focuses on sort of instructions and guidance for filling out the worksheets. Blue text, which is, like I said, the meat of the document, that's where the examples are, and that's how we address this issue of how to get to a defined risk endpoint. We sort of walk people through examples. And then black text, which serves as minimum recommended requirements, which sounds significant like an oxymoron. How can you have a recommended requirement? But we use that terminology to define really the key quality control and quality assurance aspects of the investigation that you can vary, but if you do vary from them, you've got to provide justification up front in the document for why you're not meeting those requirements. So like I said, that's something that's obviously going on heavily with the IDQTF now, and more things will be coming in shortly. And so that's sort of where we are, right? That's what's going on here. That wraps up my introduction presentation. And with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker. So I've had the great fortune to work with Ms. Janice Lilly for I think it's over 15 years now. Janice is a senior chemist who works for my office, and she serves as the DoD's PFAS subject matter expert for sampling and testing. She also chairs the EDQW's Emerging Chemicals for Environmental Concern subgroup, and she co-chairs the ITRC's PFAS work group's sampling and analysis subgroup, and also provides training for the for the ITRC with that as well. Janice also serves on the CERTUP and ESTCB, the CERTUP, as a member of the CERTUP ESTCB's PFAS technical working group. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Janice Lilly.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I am sure that you thought you were going to escape multiple discussions on PFAS. We decided we need to give you at least one for today. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the changes in the PFAS analysis landscape that's occurred since last year's EMDQ workshop. This presentation is not meant to cover all developments, merely just the highlights. So let's get started with an update on the regulatory method home front. We now have 3 methods that have been published by the EPA. EPA method 537 has been updated now, 537.1, to include 4 additional analytes that are associated with PFOA or PFOS replacements. In addition to this method, the EPA has published another drinking water method, method 533. This method includes 25 PFAS, 14 of which are included in method 533. That means 4 analytes are unique to 537.1 and 11 are unique to 533. These 2 methods are finalized methods. In 2019, the EPA also published an SW846 PFAS method for non-potable aqueous samples, method 8327. This method includes 24 PFAS and does not include all the analytes that are included in 537.1 or 533. Method 533 is significantly different than 537.1 in that it's optimized for the analysis of shorter chain PFAS and utilizes isotope dilution quantitation. The DoD submitted unsolicited technical comments on this method to the EPA for consideration. It's my understanding that after an undefined period, which would allow for stakeholders to have ample time to utilize this method and provide feedback to the EPA may revise this method. This has been done in the past. As far as implementation of this method, it's my understanding that it's currently under consideration by many states for use for use prior to the potential use under UCMR 5 that would occur in 2023 to 2025. The proposed analyte list and their associated methods for UCMR 5 have yet to be published in the Federal Register as required, but it's expected to be sometime in September of this year. If this list is consistent with the list EPA has presented in recent webinars and as under consideration, the 4 analytes unique to method 537.1 would be required using 537.1, and the 14 analytes common to both methods, as well as the additional unique 11 analytes of method 533 would be required using method 533. The SW846-8327 method was published in the Federal Register as a draft method for the analysis of non-potable water samples only. It includes sample preparation procedures as an appendix which is intended, according to the method, to eventually be its own separate method, SW846 method 3512. The DoD issued a policy in the memorandum dated 22 November of last year prohibiting the use of this method as it requires testing of media other than drinking water for PFAS to comply with the requirements of Table B15 of the QSM. And as you know, method 8327 isn't compliant with Table B15. In addition, the DoD EDQW has issued a statement regarding method 8327, which can be found on the EDQW's page of the DENIX website. So what does this mean for the DoD? It means we are still in need of a published method for all media other than drinking water, which brings me to some of the DoD's ongoing method development initiative. First up is the DoD's effort to validate a method for the determination of PFAS in various media. The method is based on the method that was being considered by EPA for development from SGS Access, a DoD ELAP PFAS accredited laboratory. I'd like to thank SGS Access, particularly Dr. Bharat Chandramouli and Dr. Kareen Hamilton, for their willingness to share their method and their extensive involvement in this initiative. The DoD effort targets 40 PFAS, which is a huge list compared to everything else. It includes all the analytes included in method 537.1 and 533. The media under evaluation are groundwater, surface water, wastewater, leachate, soil, sediment, biosolid, and tissue. It's pretty much everything that you could possibly cram into a method. This is a CERTUP ESTCP funded project, which includes both single and multi-laboratory validation studies. The project team is comprised of members of the CERTUP ESTCP PFAS Technical Working Group. This group has representation for this project from CERTUP in Dr. Andrea Leeson, the CERTUP Environmental Restoration Program Manager, the Air Force with Dr. Hunter Anderson, the Army with Mr. Chuck Coyle, the EPA with Dr. Mark Mills, and myself representing Navy. We follow EPA's protocols for a single and multi-laboratory validation, and are coordinating input from EPA's Office of Water through Mr. Adrian Hanley and the Office of Land and Environmental Management, OLM, through Ms. Shotzi Fitzjames. All throughout the entire effort, not just at the start of the effort. The single laboratory validation study is currently underway and is being performed by SGS Access. It includes initial demonstration of capabilities, holding time studies, and sample analysis of a ton of samples. We included 3 samples each for groundwater, surface water, leachate, sediment, tissue, and biosolid, and 7 samples each for wastewater and soils. Each is prepared a total of 12 times, 3 as received, and 9 spiked at different concentration levels. The results of these analyses will be validated and the method revised to address any issues and add any clarifications needed, and include performance statistics generated by the single laboratory validation study. A method package which includes all data, all validation reports, a statistical analysis report, and the method that is compliant with the requirements for submittal by the Office of Water will be submitted to the Office of Water for consideration as a draft 1600 series method. The next step in this process, which is already being developed, is the multi-laboratory validation study. This study will include 7 DoD ELAP accredited laboratories and 3 state laboratories. The study will include initial demonstration capabilities and sample analysis on the order of magnitude signals similar to that of the single lab study. It may even be the identical structure as the single lab study. One big difference between the 2 studies, however, is the laboratory will not be spiking the required spiked samples. They will be received post-spike. Following validation, again, the method will be revised and to address any issues, including clarifications, and possibly modify existing QC acceptance criteria and include method laboratory performance statistics. Another method package will then be submitted to the Office of Water to aid in their finalization of the method. EPA has indicated that publication by the Office of Water may result in EPA OLM's consideration of the method for publication as an SW846 method. In addition to the media addressed by this method, DoD is in need of a method to prepare and analyze AFFF concentrations. That brings me to the effort to validate an isotope dilution method for PFAS and AFFF and alcohol-resistant AFFF. It's very similar to the method that I just discussed. It evaluates 33 PFAS, including all that are included in method 537.1 and those that are included in 533. The goal of this method is to achieve a limit of quantitation in these products that is significantly lower than previously achievable. This method is also a method developed by SGS Access that has undergone a single laboratory validation by SGS Access through an effort funded by the Firefighting Foam Coalition. Single laboratory validation demonstrated achievable quantitation limits of less than 25 ppb for both PFOA and PFAS and a lot of the other analytes. PFOA and PFAS in particular is of interest in firefighting community, given the upcoming REACH requirements relating to firefighting foams. From this study, where results from the study were evaluated by DoD and SGS Access, and the method was further refined in preparation for use in an upcoming multi-lab validation study. NAVC funded a multi-laboratory validation effort that included 4 DoD ELAP accredited laboratories. The study included the analysis of 4 AFFF concentrations, each prepared in duplicate as received, as well as duplicate analysis of 3 different spiking concentrations for each. All data has been received and is undergoing validation. Validation will result in hopefully in two methods. The first method produced will include only 2 analytes, PSOL and PFOS, and will be applicable to the evaluation of in-place formulations, both stocks and mixtures, and the evaluation of AFFF formulations for inclusion in the qualified product list database. This is a database of products DoD services must select from when purchasing AFFF formulations. Another method which includes, which hopefully will include all the other analytes in addition to PFO and PFOS, will be produced as well. Next up is the development of a method for the quantitation of PFAS as a class in firefighting agents. The technique currently under consideration is a total organic fluorine determination by combustion ion chromatography. This is a joint CERTUP NAVC effort designed to address the requirements of the National Defense Authorization Act to utilize, the NDAA required us to utilize what they call a fluorine-free firefighting agent containing no more than 1 ppb of total PFAS. The NDAA requires such an agent to be in place in place of the fluorosurfactant AFFF concentration starting October 1st, 2023. CIC has been used to evaluate PFAS in environmental media primarily by researchers and is not commonly offered by commercial laboratories, unlike the isotope dilution method currently undergoing validation. This, plus the fact there has been little research conducted which uses CIC to evaluate firefighting agents, significantly puts this effort significantly behind the progress of the other method. So as you can see, with the NDAA deadline approaching relatively fast in method development terms, this effort really needs to be fast-tracked. Lastly, if you've been paying attention to recent news articles, you know another evolving need for the DoD is the need for a method capable of evaluating PFAS and PFAS decomposition products in emissions relating to thermal treatment of AFFF impacted IDW, AFFF stocks, and remediation media, as well as monitoring remediation techniques. Currently, the EPA Center for Environmental Measurements and Modeling, Air Methods and Characterization Division in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, is leading an initiative to develop methods for sampling and analysis of ambient and emissions, ambient air and emissions for the presence of individual PFAS, total organic fluorine and total organic fluorine by CIC, as well as non-target analysis. CERTUP has funded a study to characterize emissions associated with thermal treatment of PFAS contaminated soil at a thermal treatment facility in Alaska recently to aid in this effort. Moving to an update on analytical standards availability, there's a couple of developments. In addition to the reference materials Dr. Reiner of NIST discussed during last year's EMDQ workshop, NIST is currently funded by CERTUP to create 4 AFFF reference materials. Analysis of these materials when analyzing AFFF concentrations will provide a better measurement of method performance than currently achievable using laboratory control samples comprised primarily of reagent water. NIST and DoD are also in the early stages of development for groundwater and soil reference materials for PFAS as well. With respect to standards mixtures and proficiency test study samples availability, more will be becoming available very shortly as a result of a lot of these method validation efforts that I previously mentioned. CERB also funded NIST to create a MS non-target PFAS library. This effort has been supported to a great extent by CERB ESTCP research community through sharing of information from previous non-target evaluation. This is a significant step towards creation of a method for non-target PFAS analysis in the future. Moving to method validation, I wanted to give you an update on the PFAS data validation guidelines I mentioned last year during the workshop. EDQW developed these guidelines for the validation of data generated using methods compliant with Table B15 requirements. Draft guidelines were sent out for external review, and I'd like to thank everyone that reviewed and submitted comments with respect to them. I greatly appreciate it. We received 91 comments and addressed all of the comments and have finalized and published these guidelines at the beginning of this month. While these guidelines are applicable to third-party validators, not the laboratory's internal validation process, I encourage all laboratories to become very familiar with these guidelines with respect to the documentation that could and most likely will be requested for each stage deliverable. If needed in the future, the EDQW is considering development of a training module based on feedback. And lastly, one question I get every year at the workshop is, what's next? Well, PFAS is the gift that keeps on giving. As previously discussed, we need a means of measuring total PFAS in environmental media. It's my understanding that EPA ORD plans to develop a total organic fluorine by CIC method for not only air and emissions testing, but also for other media as well. I could also see the need for determination of neutral and volatile PFAS content in environmental media. Typically, researchers have been utilizing GC-mass spec for such analysis. And that brings me to, again, the non-target analysis that I previously mentioned with the NIST GC-mass spec library. We really would be looking towards a method such as with a non-target analysis for forensic analysis in the future if that need arises. With that, I think that's the quickest update we've ever given on PFAS.
Thank you, Janice. I believe now we will be moving to questions and answers. We've received a couple questions. So if you all have questions, please submit them in the Q&A section. Janice, we have a question here. Can you discuss the difference in sensitivity in method 8327 and the method being developed with DoD/EPA?
Okay, so the method sensitivity, is going to be determined. The final method sensitivity is really going to be determined through the method validation study. But in general, because we're utilizing the solid phase extraction versus a direct inject method, you can expect for the isotope dilution method to be much more sensitive utilizing the solid phase extraction method. Plus, it'll be, the most definitive accurate quantitation out there is really isotope dilution. So we're hoping to see really good correlation with true values when it comes to the isotope dilution method.
Excellent. Thank you for answering. We have another question. Janice, do you know if EPA is discontinuing development of either method 8327 or 8328?
No, I do not. That was an easy one.
Thank you. Can you provide any information concerning timelines for the methods under development?
I knew that was going to be a question. That's a great question. Given the current state of affairs out there and people running at limited capacity in laboratories due to COVID-19, and just, everyone knows that when you're developing a method and you're validating a method, you can expect some surprises to arise. I really cannot give a timeline, with the exception of the AFFF PFOA PFOS method. Most likely that method will be issued when the next military specification for AFFF is released sometime this year, probably within the next couple of months.
Excellent. We have another question. Is the DoD going to formulate a holding time and preservation requirements for waters and soils, non-drinking water?
So the validation study, as I said, includes holding time studies for a ton of matrices. And all of that information is going to be sent along with the method to the Office of Water for consideration. They will basically make the final determination of what, with respect to the holding times, is included in that method going forward. And if, like I said, if OLM adopts it as an SW846 method, they would do the same thing with respect to this SW846 method.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you discuss the availability of the ITRC training?
It is available. In fact, the ITRC also has finalized their regulatory, technical regulatory document, and as well as a whole slew of online little quick training videos with respect to each of the topics covered by the ITRC technical regulatory document, and they can all be found on the ITRC's website. Actually, the link to them they are actually YouTube videos.
Thank you very much. We have a question here. How is the DoD addressing sampling and testing of private drinking water wells? Is method 537.1 to be used or table B15?
That is dependent on the individual service that you are talking about. The DoD either uses method 537.1 for that assessment or table B15 methods for that assessment. Depends on the service that you're speaking about.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question here that is, has there been any research into stack testing methods?
Oh yes, definitely. So the folks up at RTP, EPA ORD, have been doing extensive stack testing, and that's all included in the emissions testing that I was referring to.
Thank you. We have a question here. Janice, you stated that the PFAS data validation guidelines were to be published this month, i.e. May 2020. Have they been published and are they currently available?
They have been published and they are currently available on the EDQW's DENX page.
Thank you. We have a question from a attendee that asks, how common is the combustion IC technology in current laboratories? And will this be a significant capital expense for laboratories to move to this method?
It is not very common. That's why I'm saying that, hey, it's a future need, hint, hint. But it is not, with respect to the capital investment that was needed for LCM FMS, it is significantly less than that. And I do know for a fact that there's a number of our DoD ELAP accredited laboratories that have already purchased the instrumentation needed.
Thank you very much. Have laboratories been solicited for a total organofluorine study?
They have not. Not yet. Like I said, that initiative is much farther behind than the isotope dilution method initiative. And partly because, like I just said, that there's not a lot of DoD ELAP laboratories or any commercial laboratories out there in general that have all the instrumentation needed for the analysis. You can be sure that when we do have such a validation effort, that we will be sending out an email to our laboratories requesting, some interest to be expressed.
Thank you. Is the DoD method being developed for submission to the Office of Water the same method the EPA has been discussing as a new 1600 series method, or is EPA developing their own 1600 series method? If there are two methods, how are the agencies resolving? Okay, thank you.
It's the same method. It's the same method.
Will the SPE used in the new method be similar to that used in 533?
I cannot give you any information on that right now. We've got to wait. We've got to wait until that gets published, or basically gets published, because it's still under development.
Thank you very much. We have a question here that is, will DoD require separate reporting or branched isomers from the linear compound, particularly PFOA and PFOS?
No. Of course, we have project by project, on a project by project basis that may change, but the method as it stands will be similar to that of the EPA methods, in that the sum of the branched and linear isomers will be reported.
Thank you very much. We have a question here. Do you have any information concerning the regulation of other PFAS? Will analyte list be expanding?
I'd have to look into a crystal ball on that one for sure. You can see there's a lot of tox studies being performed currently right now for other analytes in addition to PFOA and PFOS. Whether or not that's going to result in any regulatory requirements is obviously totally unknown at this point. But more and more are being evaluated, and, that's yet to be determined. I would suspect so, but that's just me saying, as we start investigating more and more analytes and have the capabilities to investigate more and more analytes, there's more and more data compiled for evaluation in the future.
Thank you very much for your response. We have a question here. Are you familiar with the USGS method development activities? And if so, how do they differ from what DoD is currently working on?
The USGS has a bunch of initiatives started. The most farthest along in those efforts is a direct inject method that utilizes inline solid phase extraction, I believe. And that's where, the difference lies for us. We require the full sample that was collected to undergo solid phase extraction, in addition to the rinse of the actual container that the sample was in. So that's the biggest difference between the methods.
Thank you very much. Will the DoD be developing guidelines or protocols for the centrifugation of aqueous samples containing high levels of suspended or settled solids?
Currently, no.
Thank you very much. Have you thought about using the recovery criteria currently in the 1600 series, i.e. 1613, 1668 method from isotope dilution for the PFAS methods?
We are going to see where the validation leads us and determine from there what would be acceptable for this method. It being an LCMS-MS method and different in many ways from those methods. We're going to see what the validation studies tell us and go on from there. So that's yet to be determined if some of them are going to be very, very similar or you know, have some significant differences.
Thank you. For now, what is the recommendation for holding time and preservation for non-drinking water and solid samples?
So the DoD hasn't put out any recommendations on that exactly, but the ITRC technical reg document does have suggestions that until published methods with with documented holding times studies have been published, that they recommend that basically the holding times present in the published EPA methods be referenced.
Thank you. We have a question here. Can you comment, does the TOF method in development use AOF, absorbable procedures, and is it limited to use on FFAs?
We are going to be looking at all options with respect to the CIC method. We have yet to go down that road. Like I said, we are just in the very early stages of developing those methods. So we're entertaining all options and reviewing any documented protocols in published literature to make a decision on that.
Thank you. Is there an acceptable method to sample non-aqueous samples now, i.e. soil, sludge, etc.? Can we use B15?
Sampling method is as far as the field sampling method. There are some considerations and recommendations that are in the ITRC document. But Table B15 basically doesn't have any sampling protocols except for laboratory sampling, which basically the requirement is to homogenize the entire sample, which is typical for most organic methods. And however, we do spell it out in the table because we have seen issues with samples not being homogenized in their entirety prior to subsampling. But that is really all of the sampling protocol that we have for soils at this time.
Thank you. So with the current concerns that have been raised with PFAS in air, has there been a hold placed on incineration of PFAS waste? Yeah.
There are I'll put it this way, there's very, very few incinerators that are accepting AFFF impacted materials at this time. There are some, but there are very few.
Thank you. Are the new standards development to include more branched isomers or just targets on new method lists?
So it's very hard for the standards providers to develop methods, develop standards that include branched isomers. That process is rather tricky. The standards that I'm referring to are new standards with respect to addition of new analytes. You know, with 533 coming out, and you know, some of the analytes that we added to our method initiative are specific concerns relative to landfills, landfill leachates. Those analytes, you know, are going to be most likely added to future mixes. The initiative for the multi-lab validation study one of the aspects of that, like I said, the laboratories will not be spiking those materials. They will be sent to them already spiked. In order to do so, we had to get some standards made for that effort. And so most likely those mixtures would be, well, it's been relayed to us that they would become available to commercial laboratories in the future as well.
Sorry, I was on mute. Are there any instances when we should use 537.1 or 533 instead of the DoD method?
537.1 and 533 are for drinking water samples only. So yes, if drinking water samples are your media, then you would use 537 or 533, 537.1 or 533. For all other media, it's table B15.
Thank you very much. And I believe this is our last question. We have the question, where should someone looking to learn more about PFAS go for information?
Really, the ITRC technical regulatory document is a really good resource. I mean, it covers everything from nomenclature to fate and transport, remediation, AFFF, sampling analysis. It's a very comprehensive document. It's rather lengthy, around 300 or so pages, and there's a lot of associated tables with that document that you may find very, very helpful. In particular, there is under the regulatory section of that document, there is an external table that you can access that provides you with the current regulatory or screening requirements of each state. And also countries as well. So that would prove very helpful. We are continually updating the analytical sampling and analysis sections, trying to provide more current information. And those were all those external tables will be updated on a periodic basis to try to keep them as current as possible. So I'd highly recommend folks go to that document, especially for even just the baseline understanding of PFAS and some more in-depth understanding as well.
Perfect. Thank you. We had one more question come in while you were answering that. When can we expect an update to table B15?
You know, that is a great question, and we're going to put that on hold for Ms. Alyssa Wingard in the future, who will be talking about the QSM extensively. So I'm going to leave that one to her, and I think that'll be it.
Excellent. I believe that concludes the Q&A that we've received.
I will notice that our participant level is at 452 at the conclusion of the PFAS talk. So if I see that go down before we go to data validation, I'll know why. But I think we have an informal potty break right now. If we have a little more time before we get started.
That's right, Brian. So why don't we let everyone take a break? Why don't we, everyone, we're going to start promptly at 3 o'clock. So if you need to take a break, and this way, like I said, if folks were sticking to our agenda, we're going to try our best to stick to that timeline. So thank you very much, Janice, for that excellent update. And so we'll take a break, and we'll be back at 3 o'clock to hear Brian talk through the data validation guidelines.
Alyssa, hopefully you noticed I fixed my roots.
I actually can't see you, Brian.
Oh, you can't see me? I just turned my video on. Janice, you must be in the quietest house on earth because you haven't been on mute once, and I've heard not a peep from a dog or another person or anything.
I put you on mute on my phone. Oh, you mean the
Ah,
background?
you're getting the phone. I see. That's true.
Yeah.
Matthew, we'll go on the polls. We're doing a little bit of side business here, so excuse us while we're doing some stuff. Doing a little bit of side business. Matthew, go ahead and we'll just run the polls. Set them for 5 minutes, but we won't run for 5 minutes. We'll try to get 70% of the people answering them. I'll try to make them answer. We'll see how that goes. You can let me know as they run down. If it gets too long, then we will go ahead and close the poll and we'll look at what everybody's answers are. Well, at least I know Kelly Black can see my roots and how well I've done with my roots.
Brian, your video is not coming through for me either.
Huh.
And with that, Brian, I will introduce you. Next up, we have Brian Jordan, who is the EDKW principal from the Army. He serves as a division chief of the Environmental and Munitions Center of Expertise Munitions Division. And more importantly for this presentation, he actually chairs the DoD EDKW subgroup for data review and management. He is probably, out of all of the presenters, the most upset about not being able to go to Disney World. Brian has an affinity for people who wear like full-length costumes because as part of his job, he does routinely have to dress up as a dog to educate folks about the risks of munitions. And with that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jordan. So I am wearing my tiara, even though it's got creatures and eyeballs. So I right now have 5 eyeballs on my tiara. Shame Jordan can't see it. I told Alyssa that I'd take care of my roots, so I did. Welcome again to this webinar series. Hopefully you all will get some value out of this and we can move forward and do more of these webinars into the future. So we look forward to it. I'm going to go over data validation guidelines and latest updates. I do not have a ton of slides. And that was probably a mistake on my part after watching Janice go and all the questions she got that were very in-depth. I think I wanted 45 slides so that there'd be fewer questions, but I guess that's what I get for thinking that we would go through and do a few slides and have a nice productive conversation. But it seems like you guys are organized to hunt for bear today, so we'll see how this goes as far as the Q&A. I will remind everybody that any of the Q&A that you've submitted, so there was a few questions that came in after we closed out on Janice's Q&A, those will get answered. We will put together a webinar FAQ or a webinar Q&A session and try to make sure we address any questions we didn't get to verbally. We'll try to get those addressed and posted with the video or the recording of this webinar. I would remind you, I will be using polling, so I will be trying to get you all to answer my questions for me. I already got solicited. Provide us a none of the above. That's no fair if you do none of the above. So I'm not going to give you a none of the above, and you'll like it. But polling, so make sure that you understand when we open the poll, if you could go ahead and make your selection and then submit that, and then we can move through the polls pretty quickly. They're kind of inherent to what I want to discuss because I want to hear what you have to say as much as you guys want to hear what I have to say. As many of you that work with me on a regular basis know, you don't want to listen to me talk too much. So objectives, we'll go over the DoD guideline status, where we're at with the different guidelines, what we're looking at into the future. and then I want to try to run a poll and see what you guys might be interested in us developing. And then we'll get on the general guidelines updates and where we're at with the general guidelines and some of the things we're doing with the general guidelines. I know this one is very important to many of you out there. It is kind of the backbone of how we do validation. And I want to make sure that you all are well aware. This is the one that will be updated soonest. So if we go to QSM 6.0, which Alyssa will talk to later, the first one that will get updated will be the general guidelines to make sure we're in alignment with QSM 6.0. And then I'll get into some of the technique-specific guidelines and where we're at with each of those and when they'll be posted. They should be posted here very shortly. Some of those that were taken down earlier, you'll notice that PFAS Module 3 got posted earlier this week, or I believe late last week it got posted. I signed and then it got put onto the website. I did check. Somebody was asking, where is it? It is up there. It is available. So if you go on to the EDQW's DNIX homepage, you'll notice under documents that the PFAS document is there. And then the data usability guidance. I want to talk a little bit about where we're at with that and what our goal is with the data usability guidance. That's about as far as I can get with our data usability guidance. But I wanted to make sure that people didn't get a misunderstanding about what our intentions are for the data usability guidance. So we'll talk a little bit through that as well. On to the general data validation guidelines. We did a revision 1 for November 2019. Primary goal of that was it introduced the X flagging into this document, as well as we've carried that through all the other modules. The X flag, you'll notice that in any of our current data validation guidelines, we no longer recognize the R flag as coming from the validator. We have substituted that R flag with the X flag. And this is where that gets introduced. It also provided a definition of a third-party validation. And in addition to that, so that being third-party validation is a party independent of the laboratory. And then it also, if you read through under 3.0 responsibilities, there's also this new character of validation, which is the government quality assurance validation, which would be completely independent of the prime. So that would also mean that it's not only the independent, not a function of the prime, but it's also the contracting is paid for by the government if we decide to go with a government quality assurance validation. We felt it was important to kind of define those things so people better understood where we were at when it came to what's being requested in a PWS for validation services, who we're expecting to perform them. And then in the future, very near future, we're going to be adding an Appendix 8 to the general data validation guidelines. And I'll go ahead and have Matthew open that up really quick. This is a draft, a kind of a sneak peek of what this document looks like. Matthew, could I have you zoom in a little bit or make that slightly larger so folks can see it? This is really a roadmap for where you would find different pieces of validation requirements within the quality assurance project plan. So if we scroll on down, it provides what's on QAP worksheet 12, 15, 18, 19, and 30. You can see that we've identified where you should be able to find specific pieces of information that would assist you in your validation efforts and your general data review efforts. So that in particular, our subgroup felt that that was needed so that we brought the discussion back to what's in the quality assurance project plan versus what's in the guidelines. So we wanted to make sure we had that. So that's where you'll soon be seeing that Appendix 8. We'll go ahead and open up poll number 1. And let's see what happens here. So if I could get everybody to please go ahead and answer the poll. And I'll answer on my end too. See what happens. And I'll let Matthew tell me whenever we get to a place. We kind of are doing our happy dance right now. Everybody's answering the poll. So please, you're holding us up if you're not answering the poll. Because the sooner we get the poll answered, the sooner you can stop listening to me ramble about the poll. Matthew, where are we at on how many people have submitted for the poll?
We're sitting at 55%.
55%? We can do better than that. I do appreciate that we still have 445 people. So we had a high of 453, I believe, for PFAS. And we had a little sidebar going on in the chat. Who gets paid more, the PFAS person doing the analyzing or the PFAS validator? My money's on the analysis of PFAS. So, but I do appreciate you guys hanging in there so you could sit through validation. Let's go ahead and close the poll. We'll see what where everybody thinks the primary source for data validation guidance comes from on your project. Let's see. You closing the poll there, Matthew? I don't see it yet. There we go. There's the results. So what do we have here? We have a lot of folks, 53 of you that voted, felt it was the National Functional Guidelines. Yes, we did. And many of you noticed that whenever you go through the data validation guidelines, in particular for the different technical guidelines, different techniques, that we do use a lot of the structure of the National Functional Guidelines. And then we have our DoD data validation guidelines. And then there's the QSM. Some of you selected that, so 41 of you. But D, that would be the right answer. The Project QAP is always the one that wins. Many times the Project QAP, that's where you should be finding the requirements for your project's data validation. So a data validator that's not in possession of the Project QAP already has one hand tied behind them back as they flip all those pages of data. The Project QAP may reference these data validation guidelines that DoD has produced, and they may reference national functional guidelines. They may reference specific states. I know that I recently got an email from one of my colleagues asking what wins, the state guidelines, the DoD guidelines, or the national functional guidelines. And I said, whatever you write in your Project QAP is what wins. So that's a project team decision. Again, this gets back to what is the needs of the project, and what Jordan opened up with early on was, how do I know quality data or what good data looks like? It's based off of what decisions you want to make, and that's really the responsibility of the EDQW, is to try to get people to recognize, develop the needs of your data and the decisions you want to make, and then go develop quality data that supports those decisions. We'll move on to modules 1 and modules 2. I know with great consternation, whenever we pulled these down, I got many a message saying, where did those module 1 and module 2 guidelines go? And I apologize, it took us a while to get those recrafted to QSM 5.3, as well as adopt some of the language that we had put into the general data validation guidelines. We needed to do the update to that one first. And so it took us a little while to get these reposted for you, but they are, I just signed my piece out yesterday, so they should be posted on the website as soon as they go through the 508 compliance. They'll get posted up onto the EDQW homepage very shortly. It's updated again to the QSM 5.3 language. The subgroup looked to minimize professional judgment. So many places where we used to say use your professional judgment for reporting data, particularly in instances where the QSM specifically said the laboratory should not be reporting data that does not meet certain criteria. We said that we basically took that out of the professional judgment realm and dictated that you should just put an X flag on it, and the project delivery team and you should make note of what the issue was, and then the project delivery team needs to make that assessment in data usability as to how they wish to use that piece of information. Poll number 2. So you guys should all be warmed up as far as how to do the poll. This is a yes, no, and there is there is not an answer for I don't like this poll. So there you are. A quick yes, no. The data validator identifies contamination within the equipment blank at 15 micrograms per milliliter, and the sample result for the same analyte is 50 milligrams per kilogram. Do you qualify this data? Yes or no? So hopefully you guys are doing all that complicated math in your head, moving out on what you believe should be the right answer. I'll take a sip of coffee while you're doing it because I still need coffee at this time of day. I don't know why. Where are we at, Matthew? Yes, no question. You should be able to answer pretty quick. What are we at?
55%.
55%. Are we at the same 55 that know how to run a poll? We need a few more people. I know that that higher math of how you compare this to that, as far as whenever you have an equipment blank, usually those are run with waters. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll, Matthew, and we'll post those results. See what we get for our results on the poll. Poll has ended, and we got almost a direct split. See, I guess you have no answer if you elected not to answer, but 155 of you say yes, you would, and 124 of you of 400 and something, 16. So we had here, let me expand the bar here so I can see. So 37% of you said yes, and 30% of you said no, and 33% of you chose not to play. Let me see if I can give you what the guidelines would say. There's a note within the guidelines. It may not be appropriate to make a direct quantitative comparison for aqueous field blanks, such as equipment blanks reported as microgram per milliliter, to a solid parent sample, such as a soil sample reported as milligrams per kilogram. At best, only a qualitative comparison can be made. I'm not saying you shouldn't qualify, but you should probably provide some level of, I would go either way, yes or no. I would probably err on the no side, but if you are gonna yes qualify with a J flag, then I would recommend that you provide some good upfront documentation of that J flag so that the data usability folks have a good reference for how they are going to proceed with that data and use that data into the future. So that would be my caveat to whenever you were doing things like that. I know I have a current contract of mine where my contractor has a very complicated formula that I don't like to listen to, where they compare equipment blanks to soil samples, and it makes my eyes roll back in my head, and I'm just tell me qualitatively what you think. So sometimes they don't like my answer because I don't really see the direct comparison of equipment blanks to soil samples. My personal opinion. So data validation guidelines on PFAS, so module 3. PFAS, that was pushed up, signed out 1 May, and they are posted on the website. It is based off of QSM 5.3, Table B15, and it's designed around the B15 requirements. It can be applied to other methods using LC mass spec. I would say that, as was pointed out in the previous discussion, much of the DoD world cycles around B15, but if you are doing some drinking water work, you can use these validation guidelines to help you through validation of LC mass spec data. What are we working on currently? So many of you supplied us comments. I do not have a number of comments. We had an Excel spreadsheet that was very long. For Module 4, which was GC methods, we received comments for that when we released it out to the general public or to the community back in July 2019. We started the rewrite or the addressing these comments back last summer and fall, and then picked up. We had to make some adjustments to the general guidelines in modules 1 and 2 and picked those up and did that. So we're a little delayed on getting you module 4, but the work group or the subgroup is going to pick up module 4 here next and start working through those comments. We're 80% of the way through addressing comments, and I would expect that we will be posting the final version this summer of the QC method or of the GC methods for the data validation guidelines for module 4. Next slide. Oh, I guess I don't know why I'm saying next slide. I'm in control. So data usability assessment, development, and focus. So the goal of this has been an interesting development for sure. It's been in development for a very long time. Some of this comes out of our needs within the munitions world, where this idea or concept of a data usability assessment was not necessarily completely transparent, but as part of its incarnation into the EDQW and us developing module 1 and 2 of the munition side of the house, it brought to light that we probably could use a little bit of this back over in the analytical chemistry world to just refocus us on what does it really mean when we talk about data usability, and who should be part of that assessment and when should it happen. The goal is not to redraft the extensive EPA guidance that's already out there. I have received many a comment from my peers that the EPA has very good guidance on data usability assessment, particularly my statistical brethren that are out there listening. They will tell me, Brian, stop getting in the way of what we already know, and we'll use statistics to answer this question for you. But that's not really what our focus is. Our focus is to answer those 4 basic steps that you see there below. It's to review those objectives in the sampling design, review your data, so take into account any of the validation or data review that you've done, and then document your usability and draw conclusions, and then provide any lessons learned and recommendations back to the project or into the future. If something wasn't successful, if the method you picked didn't work, if your ISM went poorly, all those things should be fed to the next group trying to make decisions or trying to design the next study, investigation, or remedial action. We expect to post this fall is my goal, to get these data usability assessment guidelines out there. Again, it is not a complete rewrite of the EPA guidance, and it is not as my expectation that that's our goal here. Our goal is to try to document certain aspects of the 4-step process you see above, provide some examples of how you would work through that, to define who the project team is and how that works, some of those things that we're looking at in the munition side as well. And when we do our training in the munition side, we do extensive training on how to use the data usability assessment and we'll try to develop some of that similar language in the guidance that we'll be putting up this fall. Poll number 3. Told you guys to be ready with that mouse. So hopefully we can get to better than 77% this time quickly. What is the intent of the qualification of data as with an X? Answer A is unsure, but if you added min after it, I would know. B, equals the R qualification. C, provides opportunity for PDT discussion concerning data usability and application of appropriate qualifications. Now is when I wish I had a little bit of game show music in the background so that I could just turn it on. Make a note, Matthew. I need that for next time. I'll have it on my iPhone ready to play. That way, whenever I have the polls, I can turn the music on. I do like doing this much more in public. Nobody laughs at my jokes whenever I'm sitting here by myself. Where are we at, Matthew?
We are at 69%.
69. We got to do better than 69. Come on, guys. It's an A, B, or a C. And Andrea, you can't vote more than once for B. I'm not even sure. I haven't seen Andrea in the group yet. She'll send me a nasty chat message, though, here soon. All right, Matthew, go ahead and end the poll, and we'll pull up the poll and see what our results are. See how many people didn't vote. All right, so 4 people went with X-Men. That's good. I'm glad. I agree. Put the min after the end. Everybody knows what X means. 12% with equals R, 57%. That's great. Maybe I don't need these data usability guidance. So 57% went with provides that opportunity for the project delivery team to look at all the aspects of the data and assess whether or not to reject the data with an R flag or to use the J flag and document its uncertainty towards its decision making. 27% of you elected not to play. But that's okay. You have another chance. We'll go to poll number 4. See what happens. Poll number 4. Who should be part of your data usability assessment? And this, I believe, is a multiple select. So we'll give you a little more time. You don't have to just pick one. You can pick many or all, whichever way you are happy. And then we'll have a discussion about who I feel should be part of this. I think Ed would agree and Jordan would agree, but we'll see. We'll see in the Q&A if they agree with me. Or I guess Jordan, he can unmute himself and he can disagree with me if he wishes, live and in person or in virtual. We'll give you another, let's say another 20 seconds to answer the poll. Select all that apply, who you think should be part of the data usability assessment team. These would be the actual physical bodies that you think should be performing your data usability assessment. All right, go ahead and close that poll. We'll see where we're at. All right, let's see. I think the very first one is interesting. And Richard Regal sent me a chat saying it's the chemist job. That's great, Richard. So the results for laboratory, so 39% of you put the laboratory in there. I would probably think that that is not where the laboratory should be, but particularly judging on how much you guys are currently getting paid to do your analysis. I don't know when we would pay you to do sit down and do the data usability assessment. You definitely supply a piece of the puzzle, but the data usability assessment, we would generally see the prime contractor, yes, definitely. Government personnel, yes, definitely. The regulator, yes, definitely. We need to have that regulator. The validator, probably don't have the direct validator unless that happens to be the same person who's part of the prime contractor's validation group or that project chemist. The validator is really looking at the yes, no's, the plus minuses, and supplying a summary report that is being used by the data usability assessment group. But I would not anticipate that we would have the validator directly in that assessment group. And then any other project stakeholders should be part of that. And why do we have that regulator and that project stakeholder identified as part of the data usability assessment? Well, they're part of your decision team. So really, when we're looking at data usability, it's about how good is our data going forward to make the fundamental decisions that we need to make. We have to remember that part of that step one is reviewing the objectives in that sample design, and we need that full team understanding and stepping through the process of where we're at. So we may look at during that that review of data, we may look at corrective actions and how we implemented during certain phases of the work. And we would want to make sure our regulator or any other stakeholders are in the room when we do that kind of discussion to make sure that if there are hiccups to the sampling or what we need to do, that or hiccups to what that data is trying to represent, then we have had those transparent discussions with our regulator and our stakeholder in the room. So it is not envisioned that data usability is a one-person operation. I know that in the past, it's quite often been seen that way, as the government's chemist makes the final decision, that they're part of the team that's going to make decisions related to how data is being used. So I'm sure my email box is filling right now from folks that are upset that it's not the end. So that's all I have for presentation materials, which means that I still have another 20 minutes of Q&A, which is good. We want to provide that opportunity for you to have Q&A. I also have additional polls, so if we that I would like to give for you also. If we run out of questions directed for me, then we can move on to some additional polls that I think we can have a discussion about if we don't have any questions. I imagine that with 400 and, we're down to 434. We lost a few, but that's okay. I'm good with it. I tried to hold them here out, Alyssa, so I'm trying to get them all the way to the ELAP discussion. See what I can do.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian, for your presentation. So now we will move to the question and answers section. I have a question here. For each stage of a project, i.e. removal, PA, SI, RI, etc., is there a required level of data validation, such as 1A or 1, 2A, 2B, 3, 4? Is this project specific? If so, how do you decide what stage to put in the QAP?
Great question. So that is not a decision made by a single individual. That really is your project team. So what goes in the QAP should be a project team decision. It really is dictated what level of validation you need and at what level you need to make decisions. And so, and I'll be very blunt about it. So the cost of your decision, so what is the risk of your decision may dictate at what validation level you need to validate your data. So if you're not making high cost or high risk decisions, this is why you your ORP data that's being done in the field does not go through the same validation procedure as your BTEX analysis run off of 8260. Because the decisions you're making based off of ORP or dissolved oxygen may be much less risky or important relative to the total project budget than finding out that benzene is elevated off of your effluent from your treatment system. So that's really how I look at it from what level, but it is fundamentally a project decision, and you'll notice that we provide some guidance in the guidelines as to what we feel are reasonable expectations for validation, but in no way should those be interpreted as must or requirements. It is really a project team's decision as to what level they feel they need to validate based off of the decisions they're going to make. Jordan, did you want to jump in?
I think you answered it correctly, Ron. I think that's spot on.
No, I noticed that you had unmuted your phone, so I didn't know if you were up for jumping in.
No, I was just ready to jump in, and I muted my phone, not on the thing.
Yeah, understood. Okay, next question.
Thank you. So how do you respond to the question of why do we need to validate the data and incur the expense when we already selected a certified laboratory?
Why do you need to validate the data? So you need to, you are setting, so the current lab accreditation is a single point in time. So that all happens when the accrediting body visits the laboratory or reviews their paperwork. So it's a very specific point in time. You're validating data relative to your project related to the actual circumstances in the laboratory when the samples were run. And that is all measured on a batch by batch basis. And those control parameters and all those minimum requirements of the QSM, as well as what you supplied in your QAP that you elected or chosen to use for your decision making, then those are what govern to the performance of the data relative to the decisions you want to make. So you need to understand your data at the time your data was developed. So that's why we validate data.
Thank you very much for that response. We have a question here. Is data usability assessment where you convert X qualifiers into real qualifiers?
Yes, so that is where we would expect that to happen, is it has to be a project team decision. So, and quite often, the project chemist from the government as well as from the contractor may sit down and provide some summary information to assist that larger team, but that really needs to be something that is discussed in the larger context of the decisions being made with a given piece of data. And it's a fundamental decision point as to what you do with a piece of data that has flaws or has uncertainty with it, and then based off the decisions you need to make, can we still use that piece of information, or do we need to go collect additional data or another piece of information?
Thank you. For many of our DoD projects, we prepare the QCSR. Is the data usability assessment considered analogous to the QCSR?
The QCSR would be a piece that would feed into the data usability assessment. It'd be a very useful piece of or summary of all of the information that goes into a data usability assessment. But that data usability assessment needs to be a separate documented activity that includes, because QCSRs are generally produced by the contractor in somewhat of a vacuum relative to the other project team decision makers. So the regulator, any other federal entities that are involved with the project, as well as the government, need to be involved in the decision about what to do with data. That does not mean that they won't just that they won't look at the QCSR and accept all suggestions from the QCSR, that may be very true, but they need to have that opportunity to just say, oh, here's this piece of information. I want to use it for this decision. I need either a better piece of information or this is fine, and we recognize that uncertainty going forward. And that needs to be documented in that data usability assessment.
Thank you, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
The NFG seems to have a hierarchy of when you qualify metals data. If the MS-MSD is out, but if spike, duplicate, and PDS are okay, no qualifiers will be assigned. Does the DoD ICP guidance provide a similar hierarchy?
We tried to avoid the hierarchy. We pretty much, this is when I wish Andrea was a panelist so that she could answer the question. But I don't know exactly where we would go as far as we're trying to avoid giving you the hierarchies of when we do that. But I will get you an answer from the subgroup as to how we would approach that particular question. It's been difficult within the subgroup because there are certain pieces, and we're a firm believer in the reason codes, and to supply the summary of the information to the data usability assessment team so that they can work through the process. So I will get you that answer.
Thank you. Regarding who should be a part of the data usability, can the input from regulators and project stakeholders come through review of draft documents, or must these communications be teleconference or in-person meetings?
Great question. So sure, they could be from the review of a draft document, but I would highly recommend before you start putting together all of the other important pieces of an RI report, of a remedial action report, that you have concurrence on that data usability, because some of the decisions or directions you may go are highly influenced by how you're going to use your data. So it's important that we have that documented before you start putting together too many of your trend analysis, all of your tables, all of your charting, all of your figures that go into those documents. It's of fundamental importance that you have everybody's hands stacked on how this data is going to be used. So I would not wait until the draft final of your RI report and think that's when you're going to do your data usability assessment. It should more often than not be something that you handle as you get your information in and you start discussing where you have uncertainty and how you're going to use the data, and then document that data usability going forward. It may be on a sample delivery group by sample delivery group discussion if the decisions are that important that we need to know. If you're doing monthly groundwater sampling and you're having to report out data to homeowners, then you're probably going to be doing a data usability assessment every month. If you can wait until you have 6 months worth of data to make your final decisions, and you're going to summarize that and have a data usability assessment before putting together a final report, then that's fine. Have your data usability assessment then. But it really comes down to what decisions are you trying to make with your data, and how important is it going into the future, and how much time are you going to spend spinning your wheels if you use data that you have not been pushed through the data usability assessment.
Thank you, Brian. Thoughts on creating a radiological validation module?
Pull number, go ahead and pull up. I don't remember if it was 5 or 6. Let's do that. I'm glad you asked that question because I have a poll for you. As you saw, we're working on the GC one next. So let's get an answer on this one. Yes, we are definitely looking at doing radiation chemistry or radiological chemistry. We've been looking at the LC explosives guidance. The ICP mass spec metals one, we actually have a version of this that we have not run through subgroup review yet, but because we had the previous ICP one adding the mass spec, not terribly difficult. But, and then I wanted to get you a perspective from you all, whether or not it'd be worthwhile look at prep methods, and in particular ISM and some of the caveats and pitfalls of ISM. And then if there's others, I would request that in the Q&A, if you have others that you would like to recommend to the subgroup, just throw them into the Q&A, and we won't actually do a Q&A based off of the others, but if you want, go ahead and if you answer other, or you can think of others that you really want us to address and think there's a giant need for, please throw that in the Q&A and we'll take some suggestions there. So go ahead and answer the poll. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and close the poll. Poll has ended, and I didn't cheat and say which one I wanted because I want to do ISM next, but I know I won't get that. Actually, I don't want to do ISM next because I know that involved me doing a lot of writing, so it probably won't be ISM. Just being honest. Oh, what do we have for percentages? So 8%, only 8% of you do explosives, 13% on the metals, radiation chemistry, so 13%, 14% on prep methods, so that's interesting. 50% of you decided you didn't want to play. Got a few others, so I'd be interested in what those other methods are that you, or techniques that you guys would look at us doing additional guidance on. Like I said, some of these we've already started or have reasonable 80% of. The radiation chemistry, of course, we'd be reaching out to our brethren at DOE to assist us with, because I think they would want to play in that world as well. I appreciate you playing with the poll. And we'll go back to Q&A. Is there another question?
Yes. So we have a question here. Based on the procedure that you described, would changing X flags to R flags not take an exceptional amount of time?
Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you don't have a lot of X flags when you're going through your data. And when you do have X flags on a given set of data at a sample delivery group or batch level, or monthly time period, when you notice you have X flag data, you should probably convene your project team and start discussing how you're going to use any of your X flag data and whether or not it needs to get assigned to an R or a J or a UJ. Those are, would I anticipate that it happens in 10 minutes? No, it's probably going to take you a couple days to get that group together. But I am not thinking it needs to be a meeting held in the project location. It probably is a meeting that's held very much in the world that we live right now, virtually. And any summary information is brought to the table about how the X flag got applied and why it got applied. And then a decision is made as to whether or not the method is performing appropriately. Is the laboratory performing appropriately? Is the sample crew performing appropriately? Whatever is driving the decision to X flag the data should be brought to the table and discussed with the project team. So is it going to happen right away? Probably not, but it should happen in a reasonable amount of time so that you understand where the project needs to go when you start seeing X flag data.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we have time for about 2 more questions.
Can we run my last poll really quick?
Yeah, we certainly can. Let me
throw that up there. Because this is a poll that I put together because we are getting questions, and I'm interested in what equals experience. So I want to see how many years in this group. We have 427 people on. All of you should be able to answer this question, no problem. How many years in your career have you worked in an analytical production laboratory? A, never worked in a laboratory. That'd be me, because I moved right to management. Actually, I worked in a laboratory, but it was a cement laboratory, and our most sophisticated piece of equipment was an XRF to analyze cement. B is 1 to 5 years, C 6 to 10 years, D 11 to 20, and then E 20 plus. It was before the fume hood and therefore have forgotten the last 20 years. Let's see how many. Did you end the poll for us already? Let's see, what did we get? I'm interested in what our percentages are here. Matthew, you throwing it up? There we go. Pretty good split. We have 17 of you that have lost your mind. That's good. So that's pretty even split across the board. So that's good. Next question. We'll get one more in here before my time is up.
Is it appropriate to combine qualifiers, examples UB and UX?
No, it'd be UX. It'd be X. If your qualification is X, then it would be X.
Perfect.
And then the project, then you need to summarize why the X was placed on the data, and then you would also have the B flag, or if you had additional quality control issues, then that should also be documented in the summary report so that the project team can make a decision that if they decided to use the data and its uncertainty associated with the primary quality control that led to the X flag, then they would notice that there's also uncertainty associated with blank contamination or some other issues. I think that gets me to my time. I don't want to use up Alyssa's time. Am I close?
Perfect. No, you're done, Brian. Thank you. And so now, thank you, Brian. We appreciate that update on the data validation guidelines. And now it's time for me to introduce our final speaker for the webinar, who is Ms. Alyssa Wingard. Ms. Wingard is a senior chemist working for my office, and she's been with us for about 14 years or so as well. Alyssa serves as the chair of the quality assurance oversight and outreach subgroups of the EDQW, and she's also the program manager for the DoD ELAP program, and that's what she's going to be talking to us about today is the ELAP and an update to the DoD QSM. And with that, Alyssa, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that very much. Thanks to all of you for sticking around this afternoon. I'm pretty impressed to see that we still have 425 of you online currently. So I feel like this webinar was a success in light of the situation we're currently dealing with. Before I get on with the presentation, I do need to give a special thank you to Matthew Lloyd and Jeremy Boyner for all of their behind-the-scenes work that they have done for this webinar. I'll say the workshop we host every year, they put in a ton of work to that. They have actually put in almost an equal amount of work to this webinar. We had to test many web platforms. As you can imagine, the Department of Defense is very strict on what kind of platform you can use. So they have put a lot of time into testing this, and so far I feel it's been a real success, and I hope that you guys give us some feedback moving forward about what other types of webinars you might like to see. So today I'll be talking about the DoD ELAP status, what is going on with remote assessments in regard to COVID-19. We'll be talking about remote scope expansions and the EDQW's take on the remote scope expansions. And lastly, I'll be talking about QSM version 6.0 development, that daunting subject for me. So this is a slide I generally put up every year. It shows the current DoD ELAP status. It shows the number of laboratories that are currently in the program. If you look at the very bottom row where it says total labs, you can see that from 2018 to 2020, we really have not seen a significant change in laboratories. In my opinion, I can almost say that the curve has somewhat flattened, so to speak, because we've seen very little change in the numbers. Our peak was back in 2012, where we had 102 laboratories. Now we're at 80, which is not a huge decline, about a 20% decline. But before DoD left, there were 44 laboratories. So that being said, we're about double in our program. We've really opened it up to a lot more laboratories, and I would hope laboratories are benefiting from receiving work from the Department of Defense. You can also see on the graph some trends from the ABs. Some of the AB numbers have gone up over the years. Some of the AB numbers have gone down over the years. And that is, in my opinion, in talking with laboratories, that is mainly due to price, service, et cetera. Laboratories essentially can go to any accrediting body that they choose to go to. This slide depicts the laboratories that have not yet been accredited to QSM version 5.3. When 5.3 was issued, the EDQW made a broad statement, a requirement, that all laboratories must be assessed to QSM version 5.3 by December 31st, 2020. So you can see this list. There are a number of laboratories that are not accredited to QSM version 5.3 yet. They may have been assessed to QSM version 5.3. I'd like to note here that we are not changing the date due to COVID-19. We have conditions and criteria with the accrediting bodies, and in those conditions and criteria, all of the assessments, they must go on site a minimum of once of every 2 years. So we feel that with the virus and with what we've done with allowing some of the remote assessments, that this can be completed. So as part of our oversight of the DoD ELAP, we review each and every assessment report that the ABs submit. We're looking at them for consistency. We're looking to them to make sure that they're citing the right reference. We're looking at them from a general point of view so that we know that our accrediting bodies are doing what they need to do when they're out assessing the laboratories for the Department of Defense. Last year, we did a summary of the findings we've seen by concentration. We put them into 5 different categories with a number of findings we received. As you can see, we have quality assurance systems that's taking the lead with 394 findings out of a total of 665. When I was digesting the numbers and thinking about where we have come and gone with our standards, I noted to myself that in 2019 was probably the first year laboratories were thoroughly assessed to QSM version 5.3, which included the new requirements of ISO 17025-2017. A lot of those which were risk-based requirements. So to me, the tick in the quality assurance systems findings could be in part due to that. The ABs also mentioned many times to me when I've been witnessing assessments on site that many laboratories actually used their QSM version 5.3 assessment almost as a gap analysis. And what I mean by that, they actually weren't fully prepared when the AB came on site with their procedures and systems in place for 5.3 and for ISO 17025-2017. So they basically wanted the accrediting bodies and the assessors to do the gap analysis for them, write the findings, and have them correct it, as part of their assessment. The other thing I'd like to note here is that the number of organic analysis findings, 126, that's a relatively higher number too, maybe due in part to PFAS and Table B15, because the organics obviously are pretty dependent on the Appendix B tables in the back of the document. We also keep a tab on the DoD laboratories that are accredited for PFAS Table B15. As we all know, Table B15 is the DoD method that we use due to the lack of a published EPA method that the DoD would consider for defensible data. So looking at this, you can see that currently we have 5 laboratories that are accredited for AFFF, 18 for aqueous, 17 for solid, and 4 for tissue. And I'd like to also note that we really are not seeing those numbers go up or down at this point. They've been pretty stable for the past year or so. Now, as far as DoD laboratories being accredited for drinking water, we currently have 7 that are accredited to EPA 537. We have 2 that are accredited to EPA 537 mod. People will pause there when they see EPA 537 mod. The reason why they pause is that for those of us that work with the drinking water methods, we know that those methods are prescriptive. They cannot be modified. You cannot change the chemistry in those methods. Upon research of those EPA 537 mod laboratories and the accreditations, the reason they were considered a mod is because the laboratories actually added analytes to the method due to project requests, and that was considered a modification, just adding analytes. So that's why those are mod, to clear that up. And lastly, we currently have 11 laboratories accredited to EPA 537.1. Although the DoD ELAP is primarily for environmental restoration work, as you can see, we do have many laboratories that are accredited for their drinking water methods. I'd also like to say at this point, there are no laboratories accredited by the DoD ELAP program for EPA method 533. And at this point, Matthew, I'd like you to put up a polling question, please. So I'm hoping you guys can all get this right, the ones of you that are still paying attention and keeping an eye on our polls. So what year was the DoD ELAP established? A, 2011, B, 2009, C, 2010, and D, 2020. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to think about your answer. You've probably seen it in a couple of places today as we've gone through the slides. And so I'm hoping I have a pretty good amount of you that can get this one right.
I feel like you're the teacher and you just gave me a pop quiz, though. I'm not sure I like that.
You know, I'm a helper, Brian. I'm a helper. I want to give everybody a chance to succeed. Yeah, I was actually working for the office when the DoD ELAP memo was signed out. And at the time, for those of you that have been around for a good while, Ed Hartzog was the director of the office. Jordan was the deputy director. And I remember the look on their faces. They couldn't believe it had been signed out. And oh boy, we knew we had some work to do that following year to get everything implemented. Okay, so let's take a look at our poll results. You guys are pretty good. It looks like, I don't know where you were getting the percentages from, Brian, because I don't see percentages.
If you slide the bar over on results, we should just get rid of the bar graph, but I'll tell you, 4% had 2011, 45% at 2009, 15% at 10. You had 3 of them go for 2020. I like it. We should start this.
I like it too.
2020.
So let's just start it all over. That'd be great. No, yeah. But the answer is 2009. It happened right at the end of the calendar year. I want to say it was in December. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but that is my recollection. Right before Christmas it happened. So as I said in the agenda for the presentation, we would be talking a little bit about remote assessments. Obviously, COVID-19 is really, really changing the way we are doing things, really having to rethink our line of work and how we are tackling the jobs we all need to do. So we obviously have seen a significant increase due to COVID-19. Of course, that caused the EDQW concern because we're used to assessors going on site, being able to witness the test. So when we realized that travel was not going to exist, we reached out to all of the accrediting bodies as part of our oversight to ask them what their procedure was for remote assessment and what type of training they were going to be doing for their assessors so that we had confidence in those assessments moving forward. A bold statement here, the intention for a remote assessment obviously is to achieve the same goal as an on-site assessment. And the way the ABs are going about that is a combination of web conferencing and document review. As we know, web conferencing is pretty dependent on your internet service. For those of us that have been in laboratories, that have worked in laboratories, we all know that those laboratories sometimes can be concrete boxes with little tiny boxes inside of them. Sometimes your Wi-Fi is not the best thing you have going in there. So that can be a difficult task to achieve. The primary goal is obviously to assess the laboratory's compliance with accreditation requirements and to confirm their competency. So they are assessing the laboratories, obviously, for our program to QSM version 5.3. A lot of times they're also including a state assessment along with that. It is up to the laboratory and the AB how they tackle combining the state assessments. As a sidebar, we do allow combined assessments, but we do not want to see a combined assessment hold up the DoD ELAP assessment or the DoD ELAP accreditation to the point where it would have to be extended. We don't see a combination working for our program in that note. As I said previously, the remote assessments are highly, highly dependent on the functionality of the technology. Planning, complete key to a good remote assessment. In my conversations with the accrediting bodies, they really have to reach out to the laboratory, get their documentation in a timely manner. Also, any type of staff interviews that can be done via telephone, perhaps, rather than with a remote tool such as a tablet or an iPad. And the relevant documents are always requested from the client prior to the assessment. That was true with all the ABs. So I'd like to go into this portion right now where we talk directly about what each of the accrediting body is doing for their remote assessments. As I go through these, you'll see a lot of similarities, but a few differences as well. So PJLA, the extent of the remote assessment, whether it be full or partial, is determined by the technological capabilities of the laboratory and staff availability. So what does that really mean right there? The way I interpret that is that many laboratories are working staggered shifts right now in order to achieve social distancing, maybe to accommodate childcare issues. So there's a lot of coordination with the AB and the laboratory for personnel availability. You might need to talk to that volatile analyst who now is currently working a night shift. So there is a good bit of coordination to make sure that the assessment can go on and you can get the information you need based on staff availability and staggered shifts. With PJLA, the software platform they're using is the GoToMeeting software. They are saying when they're doing a remote assessment that they would like to require at least 4 to 6 hours of daily online sessions. So what that says is that if your assessment had been scheduled for, let's say, three man days, they are saying that 4 to 6 hours out of each of those man days has to be a daily online session. PJLA also stated that they will postpone the assessment if the camera is not functioning properly. If they can't get in the laboratory and see what they need to see, they will postpone the assessment. I will say, as part of our oversight of the DoD ELAP, I did witness a remote assessment that PJLA performed. It went very, very well. When I witnessed it, the laboratory manager, the quality manager, and the assessor were all connected via the GoToMeeting software, and the laboratory staff actually would take the tablet to the different areas of the laboratory in which the assessor was able to ask the appropriate questions, perhaps see some documentation if he needed to, such as maybe a refrigerator log. So it went unbelievably well, the one I witnessed. I have not witnessed ANAB or HULA do a remote assessment. I'm hoping I can do that in the near future. As far as what ANAB is doing, they are following the same model of 4 to 6 hour daily sessions are recommended with obviously some flexibility of online and offline activities having to do with, staffing issues, et cetera. Unlike PJLA, they are allowing a variety of virtual assessment tools such as WebEx, Skype, Zoom, et cetera. The way I took that is that they'll work with the laboratory perhaps to figure out, and the assessor to figure out what is best between the two parties. In addition, a difference here is they will allow pre-recorded video and photography in order to demonstrate compliance with technical procedures, instrumentation, et cetera. One question I will reach out to ANAB on is if that has to be time-stamped material. HULA, they also are doing 4 to 6 hour daily sessions over multiple days, and that's what they recommend. They also allow for a use of a variety of virtual assessment tools such as WebEx, Skype, Zoom, et cetera. And the extent of the remote assessments, whether it be full or partial, is determined once again by the technological capabilities of the laboratory and the staff availability. So a difference here is that HULA is conducting a follow-up on-site assessment if needed, preferably within 60 days of lifting accessibility limitations. The point I need to make here is the remote assessments I've been informed of thus far by HULA have only been quality systems. They have not been a full technical assessment where the assessor is in the laboratory looking at the instrumentation, talking with the analyst, looking at records, et cetera. Also, HULA did mention that there's a cost form that they use to track the differences from an on-site assessment. So for the laboratories out there, that might be an interesting piece of information for you. So as far as remote assessments are concerned and the EDQW's position on this, the EDQW has discussed with the accrediting bodies that if a laboratory is wishing to add a new technology, that technology must be done on site. What we mean by a new technology, it would be GC mass spec, GC ECD, LC-MS. That's what we consider to be a technology. As far as EPA 533, we will evaluate that with the accrediting body on a case-by-case basis with input from the EDQW. Obviously, the AB will want to make sure that laboratory is in good standing, that they haven't had complaints perhaps on that technology. From an EDQW standpoint, if we have any information as to the type of data that the laboratory has generated, that might factor into the decision as well. We are trying to be obviously as flexible as possible during this time frame. We know it's a tough time, and we know people still need to accomplish their job. Lastly, EPA 533 will not be allowed a remote assessment if the laboratory has never had PFAS methodology assessed on site. So that is a complete showstopper there. If you're looking to add EPA 533, you don't have any PFAS on your scope, your AB is going to have to come on site to do that, okay? And there, Matt, let's put our second polling question up. Mine are not nearly as exciting as Brian's. I'll try to do better next time. So the polling question is, what is your favorite location for the EMDQ workshop? We've been to all of these places in the past. So I have Orlando, Portland, Las Vegas, and Omaha. Note, I do not have Rome. Rome would be a great place to go, but I don't think we could ever get that approved, and certainly not for less than $100,000. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that, and you can certainly, put that in the chat if you want. And while you're doing that, my computer has just died, so I'm going to hopefully get my slides back up.
Alyssa, while you try to do that, when Matthew pulls up the poll or when he closes the poll, I'll go through the percentages for you. That way
Perfect.
we can do that while you're
Yes, the computer is back.
You know, your
yeah. All right. I think it was a pretty easy question. It would be harder on you guys next time too. So Matt, how about we pull up the results?
Doing all that number crunching. Still 416 of you on board. That's good. Lots of numbers to crunch. Maybe we need to get Matthew a faster computer.
No, the meeting actually puts a 20-second countdown once I click the poll.
Oh, I had a private message. No St. Louis.
I was making up for St. Louis with Rome for you. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, things are always good in Rome.
Except for when, I wouldn't want to be in Rome right now, though. I got a son in Bologna right now, so he's been suffering through COVID, don't leave your apartment for 3 months now. And he doesn't leave his apartment in Italy right now.
Oh, man.
All right. Where is it at?
Where are my numbers, Matt?
There we are. Everybody wants to go back to Orlando. Orlando is the winner. Well, no answer is the winner. I don't know that we're ever getting back to Vegas. Vegas was fun. I'm up for Orlando, though. I like being in Orlando, as many of you know. I'm a big proponent for Orlando. If you talk to me when we're in Orlando, particularly out by the pool, and we're playing cornhole and maybe having a beverage out next to the pool, this is why I like Orlando. We're all kind of stuck together. I know some of you want to get out and about, but I like having you all stuck together so I can touch multiple people all at one time. So if there's my vote and it means anything as the Army principal, Orlando's what I vote for.
All right, so that's a good vote, I think, Brian, because as of now, it looks like we are going back to Orlando next year. We have a week blocked, I believe, sometime early May, and I'm more hopeful than anyone that life will be back to some type of a normal this time next year, and we'll be going back to Orlando and having some type of fun social. So. All right, here's what a bunch of you have been waiting around for this afternoon, and that is where are we with QSM version 6.0 development? It is an enormous task. Our subgroup has been working on this really diligently, I'd say for probably close to 18 months now. So I wanted to let you guys know who currently serves on the CHAOS team. It is a consensus team. Every decision we make, we come to consensus on it one way or another. There's a lot of give and take. So currently on our team, we have Army, Air Force, Navy, Department of Energy, and contract support. So as far as the federal employees, we have Jake Williams, who was with Army. We have Seb Gillette, Air Force. He's probably the oldest member, not age-wise, but the longest member on the subgroup. He was on it prior to me even being on it. We have Pamela Hamlet, who is also with Air Force. Myself, Alyssa. We have Steve Clark and Debbie Rosano from DOE. It has been a great thing having us share this document with the Department of Energy and actually as well as having their input and support on the project. And lastly, we are using a consultant to help us with the drafting of the document. In addition, both the Department of Defense and Department of Energy provide contract support for meeting minutes, note-taking, and keeping us on track. So prior to COVID-19, this is where we were. We were having biweekly telecons. We were having 2-day face-to-face meetings every other month. We are really currently struggling with our meeting length and frequency. It's a really difficult task to sit on the phone for hours, not being able to see each other face-to-face, gauge people's reads on decisions that we're making. So like I said, we've had some 5-hour telecons. We're going to try doing a 3-hour telecon. We're finding that we're losing people after about 3 hours. So we are going to plug along the best we can with our current situation. QSM version 6 is going to be a complete rewrite. It is not going to really look anything like what we currently have. We will still have the modules, but like I said, it's going to be a rewrite. I think this will make most of you happy. We're going to align with the format of ISO 17025:2017. So the format that is at right now, we're going to continue that format, and we're going to align with that. We may adopt the TNI 2016 standard in some modules. We are still discussing that, still working through logistics of that. That standard's copyright, that causes us some concern too. We know it's very difficult for the users to have to reference 3 documents when they're trying to implement everything that the QSM requires. We most likely will incorporate the microbiology module. Lastly, at this point in time, we do not feel like the PT module will align with the TNI PT module. Some of the other things that we're doing a big deep dive on, we are doing a big deep dive on the LOD, LOQ scheme that we currently have. We have looked at all different ways to generate the MDL, including MDL2. We have looked at the TNI language, and we are considering all different scenarios. We are even considering really not making many changes to it right now either, but we are taking a deep dive on that. We want it to make the most sense for the generation of defensible data. All of the Appendix B tables in the document are being evaluated against the most current EPA method. In looking at the B tables, we realized that we had not really done a deep dive on those in a long, long time. So we are currently putting together charts for each and every one of them that shows all the EPA method revisions, what QA/QC came from each one, trying to figure out where we got, our final decision from, and we're going to try to align, in most cases, with the most current EPA method, while keeping QA/QC consistent across technologies to the best of our ability. We're also going to be drafting new tables. Some of the new tables we're looking at drafting are LC-MFMS for agent breakdown products, 8260, 8270 SIM, ISM tables, one of our favorites for metals and PAHs. And lastly, we're going to be looking at a table for 1668 PCB congeners. I can tell you with that one, we are still going to require that you guys spike all 209 of them and generate LOD and LOQ studies for all 209 of them. That's not going to go away. Some of the other updates that we're making with our partners at the Department of Energy, we're looking at an update of the radiochemistry module. At this point in time, we will not be updating the LCS study. The LCS study may be updated after QSM version 6.0 has been implemented for quite some time, and we can get new numbers generated, because those B tables will have been updated, and that might lead to new numbers. The reporting section, another deep dive, we're evaluating that. Any memos that have been issued and that the subgroup deems to still be requirements and what we want to keep in the document will be incorporated into the QSM. There were many items from the development of QSM 5.3 that we postponed. For those of you that recall, QSM 5.3 was a bridge document. It was to get us compliant with ISO 17025:2017. So there were a lot of things that we didn't address because we were on a short time frame on that one, and we had to roll it out. Something we're going to do different this time, I think everybody will like it. We're going to roll out sections for comments as they're available. So once we, for example, finish a group of B tables, we're going to roll those out for comments. If we finish the reporting section, we'll roll that out for comment. And I think it will work better than having a big, cumbersome document to review all at one time. So the last bullet I have here, we anticipate the release of QSM 6.0 mid-year 2021. That's a really tentative date. It's really going to be dependent on how well our virtual meetings work. We want to roll out the best document possible to you guys. We want it to be something we can use and not have to redo. So we're taking our time. We're being methodical. We're really looking at the requirements as we compare them to the validity of the data we want generated for the program. So we're really taking our time on it, hoping for mid-year 2021. That could change. I can tell you it won't be before then, though. Okay? And I do believe with that concludes the updates for you guys. At this point in time, we're going to roll directly into the DoD ELAP open session. I certainly can take questions if they pertain to this or any other questions you have. I think Jordan Adelson will be part of the DoD ELAP open forum. Brian Jordan will be as well. And Seb Gillette will be as well, the three principals. Jordan, do you want to roll directly into it, or do you want to take a quick break?
Well, I think we should roll right into it, Alyssa. And let's have Matthew look and see if any questions came in specifically now pertaining to the ELAP update and the QSM update. Obviously, you can address those, and then we can take it from there and just continue into the open forum with questions that folks might have. So with that, Matthew, can you ask any of the questions that came in for Alyssa?
No problem. Thank you, Alyssa, for your presentation. We have a couple questions. Does the DoD accredit EPA method 680, unsure of the letter, PCB homolog analysis?
So to answer the question, a laboratory can request anything they choose to be accredited by their AB on their scope of accreditation. So if that's something that you're seeing a DoD project needing, you reach out to your accrediting body, request it to be added to your scope.
Thank you, Alyssa. All righty, we have, do ABs assess the ability to produce a quality level 4 deliverable?
The ABs, when they go on site, assess to the requirements of the reporting section of the QSM where it pertains to the deliverable. Quality is a subjective term. Requirements, they're to assess to all the requirements of the document as far as reporting is concerned.
Thank you. We have another question here. Can you explain updating the methods to more current versions without updating the LCS studies? This seems like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah, certainly I can do that. So let's look at it this way. Laboratories are currently, the numbers that the LCSs are based on have been based on the tables we've currently had. So moving forward, if we change the requirements of the B tables, we will have to use that new data that has been generated from the B table to tabulate new numbers. Actually calculate new numbers.
Thank you. We have a question here. A memorandum from the Assistant Secretary of Defense dated 2nd of March 2020 suggests that DoD drinking water samples for PFAS analysis can be analyzed by an EPA, state, or DoD ELAP laboratory. So is it correct that the lab does not have to be DoD ELAP accredited?
Jordan, I'm going to punt that to you.
So the requirements, so the laboratories need to have appropriate state certifications for doing drinking water analysis. The requirement for the laboratory to be DoD accredited actually stems from the fact that when PFAS first burst on the scene and became a concern in drinking water, the requirements, the states were actually not assessing laboratories to the requirements of 537 because 537 was really only associated with UCMR. And so the approved laboratories were only associated with UCMR. So the requirement that, so that is why we sort of see a lot of laboratories accredited for 537 on our list based on the fact that there was that gap between the requirements that existed from, from the fact that states didn't have, there was not an extensive list of laboratories the states had for doing so. Now you're seeing more states obviously go through that process for certification for doing those laboratories. So, so unless Janice disagrees with me, I would say that the requirement for drinking water is not that they need to be DoD ELAP accredited.
I would say that would depend on the policies of individual services as well, because they may implement, in addition to any guidance, additional requirements. And it also depends on the end use of the data. If it's for compliance, you have to utilize 537.1 currently.
Thank you all for those answers. We have another question here. Will you address summing total concentrations with non-detects?
So I'd love to say no to that question. I mean, that we would address it. It's a challenge, right? We always struggle with what to do with a non-detect and sort of how to handle that if we need values. There are a number of methods that can be utilized, right? Some folks actually carry things down to the detection level. Some people would use the LOD. There are times at which people use, there used to be a technique of sort of a magic 8-ball where you would actually have some randomized value between the detection limit and the quantitation limit. I mean, there's lots of ways to do that. You really need to focus on what your project needs are, what the data is going to be used for. I would say that depending on how the data is going to be utilized, if you think you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to need to do that, that is obviously something the project team should be sitting down and discussing, because it's really dependent on what the project needs are and how that's going to be carried forward. And so I invite anyone else, Brian, if you have anything to add, or Seb, anything to add to that response.
No, I think you hit on it, that if you believe you're going to be handling censored data, it's definitely a project team discussion, and you should probably be bringing in your environmental statistician to help you decide, and that it really comes down to what decisions are you wanting to make and what does that mean relative to your evaluation criteria. So I know it's a quite common thing that I see in different, or that I've heard about in different PFAS documents as far as summing up the non-detect. So it's something that the project team needs to definitely have a discussion about, and how that data is going to be used when you're using censored data.
Perfect. Thank you all for your responses. We have a question here directed towards Alyssa. In which aspects will PT requirements differ from the TNI standard?
So I'll preface this by, we are in the development of QSM version 6.0. Where the group is leaning right now, we're going to still align with having the laboratory procure from an ISO 17043 PT provider. We are not currently using the field, the proficiency testing module that the T&I standard uses. That's where the big differences are there. But as I said, we are still working through it. Things can change. We're at least a year out from publishing the document.
Thank you very much. In regards to the virtual assessments, you said in-person is required at least every 2 years. We had an off-site assessment in 2019, obviously not anticipating COVID-19. Will we be required to have an in-person despite the circumstances?
So we're going to have to be flexible with that, Allison. The requirement for the conditions and criteria that we have signed with the accrediting bodies does require them to come on site once every 2 years. But there's a bigger picture with this too. They are all ILAC signatories. And with the whole virus and the COVID-19 response from ILAC may loosen that up some and put into place some other requirements. So at this point in time, I can't really answer that. I can tell you one thing I have heard from the accrediting bodies, and that is that they are all hoping to start going on site again in June. That's the latest I've heard from them, and I've seen a few scheduled on-site assessments.
One thing, Alyssa, I'd like to add to that, if I may, is, Alyssa, during her presentation, talked about how we're not sort of shifting off of our implementation schedule for the QSM. We're not changing. ISO has their own implementation schedule, obviously, associated with 17025-2017. They have shifted their schedule based on sort of what's going on internationally, obviously, with COVID-19. But based on sort of how we rolled out our process, we didn't think we needed to. But as Alyssa correctly stated, right now our process is what it is, and we're not necessarily changing it. We'll have to wait and see. But our goal is to not necessarily have to lead on this, is to wait and see how others sort of handle the situation.
Thank you all for your responses. Can you briefly describe the LOD and LOD verification requirement update or changes?
I wish I could. We are in the biggest deep dive with the LOD and the LOD verification requirements, and we have really not come to consensus in the subgroup yet for me to really speak to that. I think speaking to that at this point in time would only cause confusion out in the community. So I will reserve the changes for when the draft document comes out.
But Alyssa, this is Jordan. I mean, it is fair to sort of say that that we are taking a hard look at our detection quantitation scheme.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's something that I think that I'm okay with, obviously, us sharing, is that we are trying to be considerate of other detection quantitation schemes that laboratories are having to meet, and see how well we can better fit in what we have with what exists and carry things forward. And we are not wedded necessarily to our previous situations, meaning that we are, we have no pride of authorship of the process that we currently have in place. Alyssa, that's all correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all. In general, are the QSM 6.0 requirements going to still mostly align with T&I 2016 to minimize the impact on laboratory quality systems?
So to answer that question, and I'll speak from me personally too. I worked in a laboratory. I understand all of the extra work that QA, QC requires in a laboratory. We put together requirements for our use to be for defensible data. We try to minimize deviating from requirements that are already out there unless we completely disagree with them, I should say. So we're going to try our best to make sure things line up at the end of the day without being overly burdensome to the laboratories. The group I have working on, the CHAOS group right now, we're really looking at things from a data usability standpoint. We have a great team of consultants helping us, and they've really helped us see things from a risk perspective. So we're going to try our best to minimize that impact on the laboratory.
Thank you. We have a question that came through the chat. What if the host lab for the on-site accreditation prefers a remote assessment to isolate their staff and protect them rather than bringing external staff into the building?
So that is a discussion that needs to happen with your accrediting body and the laboratory, and come to a decision with your accrediting body based on your status with them, what your needs are with the assessment.
Thank you for that response. I believe that's all the questions we have received thus far. If you have any questions regarding anything DoD, EDQW relating, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. This is kind of the open forum section now.
So, as I like to call it, this is stump the chump time. So you get to pick which chump you want to stump.
As they're putting questions in, if I'm not mistaken, Janice, I think there was something you needed to clarify about something that was said earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that for PFAS analysis for validation guidelines relative to drinking water analysis, since those are going to be done under 537.1, the EPA has data validation guidelines published for validation of that data. So the EDQW, the ELAP, DoD ELAP data validation guidelines for PFAS don't apply necessarily to that data for any drinking water data. For 533, there are not validation guidelines published by the EPA yet for those. I do not know if they are in the works, but I would think that they would be, since it's a different it's a different quantitation scheme than the 537.1. So I just wanted to make a clarification on that. That for modified methods that aren't associated with drinking water analysis, absolutely, you could look at utilizing the PFAS guidelines that we put out, but for drinking water methodologies, that falls under EPA's guidelines.
Thank you, Janice. And actually, I believe this question will be directed towards you, Janice. We have, regarding the Module 3 PFAS validation guidelines, specifically the qualification scheme for extracted internal standard recoveries. My question is, why we are instructed to UJ qualify non-detect results when the EIS recovery is low, between 20% and 50%?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, whoever that was. So EIS analyte should behave in the same manner as the native analyte that it's associated with, if it's an analog of that native, labeled analog of that native analyte. Keep in mind, we don't have labeled standards for all the analytes, and for those analytes that do not have an associated EIS, their behavior may be slightly different than the actual native analyte that you're quantitating. So keep that in mind. But we, while isotope dilution, utilizes the response of the EIS to adjust recoveries based off of extraction efficiencies and instrumentation variability, there's some limitation to that. And part of that's pertaining to, the relationship between the LOD, DL, or DL, whatever the project requires you to report down to, and the LOQ, i.e. how close they are to each other. So the LOD and LOQ, if it's set very close, at a value very close to the LOQ, and the EIS recoveries are very low, there's a potential for an analyte not to be detected, and even though it was in the sample, when you have these low recoveries. This is not an uncommon practice. In fact, if you look at EPA's guidance for evaluation of 537.1, they apply this to their internal standards recoveries as well. They utilize actually a less than 70% if you're evaluating internal standards off of the most current calibration check, or less than 50% off the average from the ICAL standards. So, this is well in line with other guidance that's been put out there, and it makes sense. Often we see LODs set at a value that's extremely close to the LOQ. So, there are other ways to document that you actually can see well past, down below your LOQ. But currently we don't have any requirements to do such to do that on a batch by batch or calibration basis. But that's why we say UJ, because you do run the risk, in some instances of not detecting it at all when it was actually there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Janice. To keep on the PFAS theme for a second, can you provide information on how to access the EPA data validation guidelines for 537?
They are actually posted on their website. I would have to look up the actual site, but in our answers to the questions, I will provide the link. So after this is all done, I can't spout it out right off the top of my head, but they are available online.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a question regarding the future webinar potential. Will the scheduled presentations for the original 2020 EMDQ workshop be offered in the near future via webinar?
Such a great segue into the survey that you will fill out at the end of this presentation. I just interrupted you, Jordan, but I think it leads right into the survey, and when we're asking, because that is our hope, is that we can get some feedback from you all about which sessions you'd like to see in future webinars, if future webinars is what you want to do, and then try to put those webinar series together so that we can kind of convey that similar information that we missed in Orlando to you via this platform as best we can. Maybe not 3 hours at a time. Maybe we do it at 90 minutes or 2-hour sessions and try to get that out to you. I'll hand it over to you, Jordan.
No, I was going to say the same thing, Brian. I mean, so that is a possibility for us to be able to pull sessions together based on your desires to hear what happens. Obviously, with the material presented here, that was all presented by us, by the folks of the EDQW. If there is more or different things you want us to put something together for a webinar, we'd be happy to try and do so. We have access to this tool. And we really do feel like missing the workshop was significant for lots of reasons. And we can't make up for the lacked sort of personal interaction, which I think is one of the most valuable things of us getting together in person. But we would be happy to entertain the option of putting another one of these on. So please fill out the survey, let us know, and we can see what we can do.
Thank you very much. Brian, this is a question that's kind of directed towards you. What is the EDQW's recommendation on the timeline for adopting the recently issued or new DoD data validation modules for existing/ongoing projects?
Such a loaded contractual question. So, of course, EDQW's recommendation would be to use them immediately. One of the issues with that is you may have specific language in your current contracts or contracts that the government has issued that would tell you to use one form of guideline over another. So if you've already established a QAP that has identified the guidelines you're performing under, then of course you're going to finish that contract under those guidelines unless you receive a modification or there is some other agreement in which to switch to other guidelines. So with that being said, it very much depends on your project specific. The current guidelines are the best bet we have for trying to give you guidance on how to perform your validation. And then I would point again to it. It's really up to that project specific WAP and what's in there as to what goes forward. So.
Thank you, Brian. What guidance should be used now to complete the data usability assessment until the guidance is posted this fall?
I guess that's left to me, Jordan. You're leaving that up. You're stumping the chump here. Well,
I mean, it's your subgroup, right?
Yeah, it's my subgroup. So I would look at those 4 questions that I put forward to you and see what level of documentation you are currently using to address those 4 primary questions. Getting back to, at some point you have to look at your data and look at your data quality objectives, and then what was your study question, and does your data meet the data needs of your team and the questions that you originally proposed of your site. So those are fundamental questions and answers you need to come up with in that data usability assessment. Too often, I think we look at data validation as the end-all be-all that used to answer that, and I would definitely disagree with that. The validator quite often is not looking all the way back to why data quality objectives were set or why those original questions were being proposed. So that takes a team to look at and should be very transparent and open to our regulatory bodies so that all players are on board when a decision's made based off of data we generate.
Brian, the only thing I would add to that, I think that answer's spot on. But currently, we're supposed to be doing data usability assessments anyway, right?
Yeah, it's worksheet 37.
As Brian indicated, there's already EPA guidance out there for that. There's worksheet 37 of the QAP, and it's not necessarily always as clear as it could be for how that process should go forward. But this process should be going on now. This is not a new concept. It's something that's been around. We're trying to help streamline it because we're not seeing it implemented as well as we would like. And as Brian indicated, what we're really seeing is a lot more unnecessary pressure is pushed back on the validation process. And so that, they're not, that process is not designed to ferret out the overall and general decisions that were needed to be made for the project. That's for the project team to do. And they should be allowed to do so in the process of usability assessment. And so hopefully, like Brian said, we're working on this process now, and we can get it out so it can be utilized.
And Carla weighed in too on chat. She says the QAP, of course. Thank you, Carla.
She's correct.
Thank you all. So we have another question here. Should the LOD values be the same as LOQ? One DoD lab said LOD and LOQ can be the same. Is this correct?
In general, no.
So,
Jordan, did you want me to answer it? Or you
yes,
take it,
I was going to point to you. No, listen, I was going to have you handle it. It's something that we're working on right now in version 6 of the QSM. Right now, if you read the QSM, there is some issues associated with the equating of the LOD and LOQ based on what is not necessarily in DoD QSM text, but what's in the baseline T&I document. And so this concept of that flexibility with the LOD and the LOQ being the same, some of that comes from how laboratories' LIMS systems are set up, and they didn't want to come up with a third reporting criteria to go forward. It does create sort of a problem. Initially, our concept in creating the LOD was for it to be another screening level, because there's significant issues with how the DL, or the previously called MDL, would have sort of was generated, and the value of data reported down to that value. And so our hope in creating the LOD back when we first created this detection quantitation scheme was to establish that secondary screening level, because we thought that made a whole lot more sense, sort of based on the believability of that data. But like I said, right now, this is an issue, Alyssa alluded to the fact that this is, we are discussing all of these things and how this is being handled in the QSM as a requirement going forward. Alyssa, was there anything you wanted to add?
Alyssa has put herself on mute.
Assuming Alyssa muted herself, so I think we can carry on. So next question, Matthew.
All righty. Would you please address DoD PFAS memo dated 2nd March 2020 and a posting to the EDQW website regarding laboratory certification?
So read that again, Matthew. I apologize.
They're asking a question. They're wanting the DoD PFAS memo dated 2nd March 2020 that was posted on the DENIX webpage regarding the laboratory certification. They wanted that to be discussed, that memo.
So I'm going to turn to Janice. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what that memo says. Janice, do you remember that memo?
I'm looking, there's so many memos, I'm looking to see which one they are referring to. March, that was April 2020. March 2020, I'm not sure which one that's, can whoever asked that question shoot us a note on which one it pertained to. March of 2020.
That's no problem. We'll move on to the next question so we can get some more information on that. We have a question here. Under what circumstances would QA lab be warranted, and how would a QA data be used to assess project data? Likewise, with the use of project performance evaluation samples, PE samples.
So,
go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, so we've tried to address this in the past. So, the Air Force has had programs in the past where they've actually had performance evaluation samples. We've all gone through one phase or another of using QA laboratories for analysis. And the tricky part of that is that, there needs to be an understanding and expectation of the fact that the data will be comparable, but it will not be identical if things have gone along correctly. Establishing what that criteria is for the data to be comparable is not a trivial situation. And so it becomes challenging to do so. Like I said, you see this in a number of different situations, and I've been involved with a number of projects where split samples were sent not for necessarily a QA standpoint, but that regulatory agencies wanted to send samples to their own laboratories. And when the data comes back, they're obviously not the same number because there's always going to be some level of uncertainty, based on not just how the sample was collected and then split, but also just how the analysis is performed. And not recognizing that and allowing for that is foolish, and it becomes challenging. The LCS study shows variation that we see, right, that you should sort of see naturally with sample analysis. And these are in LCS samples, which are clean matrix. So now once you add the complexities of matrix, it becomes an issue. So, the situations in which I've seen sort of refereed samples sort of sent to a QA laboratory, in most cases, this is, I've seen this done in situations where there was some fear of some litigious activity associated with the data collection. And so this was a way to sort of put yourself in a position to help better defend the decisions that were going to be made carrying yourself forward. Or if it's a fairly large project, which doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, right? The level of quality shouldn't be dependent on the size of the project, but the budget of the project afforded it. But it's not that we caution against people from doing such things, but typically when they do things, we just tell them that there's a lot of things that need to be considered and how that data is going to be reviewed and how you're going to use that referee data from the referee laboratory. Brian or Seb, is there anything else you guys want to add to that?
I would just add that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers used to have 5 QA laboratories, and we now have 0. So that speaks to the difficulty that there is in making comparisons of that QA aspect of analytical laboratory procedures from one laboratory to another. Jordan is spot on. It is the establishment of what those criteria are and how you're going to use that information going forward into data usability is very important for a project team to assess. It really comes down to what kind of decision are you trying to make and whether you're being sued at the same time. So quite often we'll see QA or split sampling happening when we are ultimately going to a legal situation where somebody wants to be in control of their own analysis, and we'll see that.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. We have this question: if reporting results to the LOD instead of the LOQ, would you advise the report include a footnote indicating the LOD false negative rate of 1%?
I think that would be helpful, and I think it would be useful. I think that would be an appropriate thing to be done. So this is, I apologize, going off on a bit of a tangent, but I'll be sort of as quick as I can with this. The whole issue of detection quantitation, I think, is easily solved if we just reported error bars around our data, right? That would make the most sense. If you look at, obviously, scientific research papers, that's how things are reported. When they're reported appropriately is with the level of uncertainty with the measurement tied directly to the sample value. And obviously, as concentrations get lower, that uncertainty becomes greater. That makes the most amount of sense going forward. The problem is from a regulatory standpoint, we don't know how to address that. I think it's valuable to identify that, to point out that that's what's going on. We don't have a requirement to do so, but I do think the problem we run into is that a lot of the customers of the data we produce don't know how to handle that level of information, and it's a lot of times sort of beyond our abilities to resolve that challenge, to sort of educate them to the level of where they need to understand the fact that there's uncertainty with those values. Just like what we talked about with the idea of using a QA laboratory, the fact that folks would say, oh well, the values that you set at 2 different laboratories, you got 2 different values. Well, yeah. Are they within 20% of each other or 30% of each other? What does that mean relative to the decision you're trying to make? So I think it'd be very useful if I was a client to see that, so that you can convey that. My only concern would be that, like I said, because of depending on the user community, the folks that are looking at the data, I don't know how much benefit they necessarily get out of it because of their potential lack of understanding. I'm not trying to be insulting about those folks. It's just not an area that I think that they spend a lot of time thinking about. Brian or Seb, is there anything you guys would like to add to that?
I think you're spot on with it. It's one of the difficulties I face whenever I'm reviewing documents is, particularly when people are trying to make decisions down at or requesting that data get reported to the DL as far as detection. And I struggle with that understanding and trying to help them, but they're being driven by decision criteria, quite often ecological criteria, that has driven them way down there to be looking at the DL as something representative of a decision they need to make. And I try to warn them that there's a lot of potential error and uncertainty with that measurement way down there, way at the DL. So, and then take that to the LOD, and sure, that information would be very helpful for a project team, particularly if they're trying to make decisions right at the LOD to understand what that uncertainty is or what that error bar. I'm sure all the radiochemists that are still online, we still have 315 people. If we have any radiochemists, they're like, we give error bars on all of our data. It always has a plus or minus. So it would be helpful.
Perfect. I think, Matthew, I think we might be out of time. I just want to once again thank everyone for attending the meeting. I look at this as a tremendous success. Hopefully we're able to convey useful information to you guys. I implore you to take that survey at the end and let us know if you'd like us to do this again and what topics you'd like us to cover. Like Brian said, we could go through some of the sections that we had planned to put together for the conference itself, or there could be another topic area that you'd like EDQW to address and discuss. And so please feel free to provide that information to us. We'll be happy to set one up if we get, the feedback that asks for it. As I said at the very beginning, this webinar has been recorded. Once the recording is posted, we will be sending out a link to the recorded presentation. And with that, I think we're good to wrap up. Everyone have a safe rest of your day or evening. Thank you.